Hey, good day, everyone. This is Michael here with you again. Wanted to talk a little bit about this statement. Just because you have the capacity and or ability doesn't mean it's your responsibility or your obligation. All right, so this is something I've struggled with pretty much my entire life. If you wanted to state it in simple terms, you could say something like, how people say, well, they're a recovering Catholic or they're a recovering alcoholic or something like that. I am a recovering people pleaser, right? And so from the people pleasing perspective, how do you operate? Right? Well, that's very easy. From the people pleasing perspective, this is me, right? This is where I'm at. This is another person or people, representative of people, could be things, could be a number of things. So we're just going to say this is other. All right? Where is a people pleaser's focus? A people pleaser's focus is always, almost exclusively over here. This is where their attention, their energy, this is where it's being directed. And it doesn't matter if it's being directed to a specific person. It doesn't matter if it's being projected to a specific role, a specific business, career, any number of entities that this energy can be directed to that is other. Because your value, my value as a people pleaser relied on the others in the mix, right? My value, my sense of worth came from helping others in order to get the love that I needed, right? Then maybe I needed to be the good boy because that was the only way I was going to get it. Maybe I needed to repress and suppress certain emotions because those emotions weren't validated in my environment. And so you learn that in order to have a sense of worth, in order to have a sense of value, and again, I'm speaking from my experience, in order to have a sense of worth, in order to have a sense of value, you look for that over here. And by doing certain things for others and or always being available for others, by always scanning the environment, right? Because a people pleaser doesn't look at their environment necessarily as safe. They are looking at their environment and scanning and observing the environment all of the time, looking for threats, right? Real or perceived. And it is their job, they have learned that it is their job to appease the situation. This is why people pleasers are basically, they're kind of passive, right? They are observers or scanners. And what's interesting is the amount of energy that it takes to constantly scan your environment. And the truth is, we don't know we're doing it. All of these things were set at such an early age in order to feel some sense of safety. We learn ways in which when the environment goes sideways, when the person goes sideways, whatever the situation is, we learn how to accommodate that, how to appease that, how to bring it back to a level of safety that we can function in so that we're not constantly on hyper alert up here. Now, don't get me wrong, you are on alert, but there's a difference between a paranoia type of alert, right? Versus the casual observation where you're picking up all of these cues at a subconscious level. And you can sense something's off here today with so-and-so. And your being is like, okay, all right, let's just figure out what we can do. Let's just appease the situation as best as we can. And the fact is, things still went sideways. But they went sideways a lot less. And we learned coping mechanisms in order to bring the environment, in order to soothe the other person in some capacity, which would then make us feel better and bring us back to a sense of safety. It would also reinforce that that is where we get our worth and our value from, by helping another. Generally, what is going on over here, what we have learned is that we have to be, that we are the regulator. We are the regulator of another person's nervous system slash emotional state. So this is what we learned. This is what I learned, right? That when I could bring this, if something was going south over here, I learned that by doing certain things, I could get the hug I needed. I could get the love I needed. I could feel like I was accepted. I could feel like I was valuable. I could feel like I was worthy. But all of my identity is then other oriented. And in fact, we began to lean so much into the people pleasing without even knowing it, because that's normal to us. That's what our environment required. That we end up having a very fractured sense of self. Meaning, we generally are not thinking about ourselves. The only thing we're really thinking about, the only thing that we're really processing on a deep emotional level is making sure that we stay safe. And one of the ways that I have always stayed safe, even as a kid, is to not have a lot of friends, not get really, really, really close to people, right? I can get in, help them out, and then kind of move back out and go back into scanning and observation mode. And in all of this thinking of the people pleaser, nowhere is there a mechanism that says, is this mine? Right? The fact is, when things went south, you wanted to resolve that as fast as possible. The fact is, most of the time, it was not yours. You didn't do anything to cause whatever was happening over here. It was just going south regardless. And you never knew. People pleasers, from my experience, they end up having the feeling of walking on eggshells all the time because they are insecure in who they are and insecure in their environments that they need to be in. So one of the functions or mechanisms that I've learned through time is solitude, right? Even growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends. I've also never maintained a lot of my connections to people, right? So from grade school to high school to college to first jobs or whatever it was, I basically don't have any contact with any of those people. There may be a text message or a phone call now and then, but if I look at that, that's the way my life as a whole, for the most part, in the past has always operated. People pleaser is focused on the other, right? Everything that is actually the responsibility of the other, if this person's freaking out and flipping out for whatever reason, and it's for something that obviously you didn't do, which is generally the case, right? It is their responsibility to regulate their emotional state rather than vomiting it all back on you and saying, how could you do this to me? This is all your fault. Those are the types of things that you may have heard, right? But we don't know what we don't know. This is normal in our experience. So we end up with a very fractured sense of self, a very much a lack of self. We lack self-agency, the ability to think for ourselves in terms of, what do I really want? Is this really mine? Do I really want to do this? Right? Instead, everything becomes our responsibility. And in part, that is because we are not comfortable in environments where people are not emotionally stable. We've always been the fixer. We've always been the pleaser. We've always been the pacifist. We've always been the understanding one. We've always been the one apologizing. Even apologizing when we didn't do anything in the first place. And the reality is, when all of these things were built within us, these people, these systems, these whatever it was that was in our lives, they were just operating based off of what they knew as well. They didn't know how to self-regulate. They only knew how to not be able to handle whatever was going on and then direct that out towards the environment around them and whoever is in that environment around them. So what I spent a lot of time over the last 10 years learning is a statement that comes down to this. Just because I have the capacity and or the ability doesn't mean that whatever's going on over here or whatever's going on in the world, it doesn't mean it's my responsibility or my obligation. We learn as people pleasers to sacrifice ourselves, to be servants to others. And when you put a religious overlay on that, it gets even worse, right? Where I learned that servanthood, it was always talking about out-serving the other person, going the extra mile, right? Always thinking about what the other needs. Because to think about yourself was regarded as bad, regarded as sinful, was regarded as you took your eyes off Jesus. So always think about the other person. What ways can you serve them? Or whatever entity it is, what ways can you serve them? And serviceness is equated to godliness, right? And it's also equated to sacrifice. But the message that you get from that sacrifice is also abandonment. It's abandonment of self. So you're so focused over there all the time that you're not grounded, you're not centered here. And to think that way, to try to revert your mind, to try to retrain your mind, to say it's okay for me to think about myself. It's okay for me to put myself in the equation. And yet, when you say that, you'll have some Bible thumper say, well, the first is last and the last is first, i.e., you should always make yourself last on the list and be a servant of others, right? That is not what that is saying. The thing that we need to look at is, do I have the capacity? When you start thinking about yourself and you start thinking about what is it that I want, is this in my best interest? And also, is this in their best interest, right? So think about in my adult life now, after having the experiences that I've had, I've gone through the pain that I've gone through. The pain has been the catalyst in my life for lots of transformation because the pain got so bad I couldn't take anymore. So some of the things that I've now learned is, wait a minute. See, I used to want to save other people from the same pain I experienced. And it took me a while to get to the point to realize, wait a minute, I can't jump in and save them, especially if they're not wanting any help. Some people haven't reached a point where they want help. When my life imploded and blew apart, I started reaching out for help because I couldn't do this anymore. No way I could continue to go down this path. But I had to make a decision. More of the same by changing nothing and doing the same thing, or reaching out and trying to find something or someone that can help me figure out what is going on, what is in here, what belief or whatever is within me that is allowing for this kind of stuff and is co-creating this kind of stuff and is part of this problematic, unhealthy dynamic. And so I started looking at other people and started saying, well, wait a minute. I can't just jump in and save them, especially if they're not asking for help, if they're not seeking help, if they're not seeking something different, because they're not going to be able to accept it. They're not going to take the help. Think about a friend in an abusive relationship of some type, right? Or with an addiction of some type. Generally, you're not able to just pull those people out of those things. Because from your outside experience, what you're seeing is like, this has got to change. This person needs to get out of this. But they're not going to be able to get out of that until they have reached a point in their life where it is time. It's the whole concept of rock bottom, hitting rock bottom, right? And that's usually the catalyst for somebody then. And I also had to think of it from the perspective of, if I'm jumping in and putting a lifesaver on somebody and pulling them out of the waters that they're in, right? Whether they want me to or not, then I'm actually robbing them from their experience. Whatever they're going through is part of something that, in some capacity, they must need. Otherwise, what are you getting out of this? Right? Dr. Phil, I think, always says, what are you getting out of this? How are you benefiting from this? So you can be in a majorly unhealthy dysfunction of some sort, but he'll always bring it back to you. What are you getting out of this? Well, from the people pleaser standpoint, we already talked about some of the characteristics that people pleasers get out of this. They derive their value, they derive their worth and acceptability and belonging, etc., from being able to help other people, from being able to appease them and please them, thus making us feel good about ourselves. So yes, there is a manipulation to it. It is very subconscious. We're not aware that that's what's going on until we start doing the inner work. I want to look at capacity for a second, right? Just because you have the capacity and or the ability doesn't mean it's your responsibility or obligation to help the other person. A lot of stuff in my life, one of the things I learned, especially through my martial arts, And, of course, it shows up in my martial arts because it shows up in other places of my life where I will bend, I will accommodate. I may have an appointment or I may have something. And if somebody needs something, they would say, hey, can you do this for me? Or can you meet me here? Or can you do whatever at this time? And my first thought may be like, oh, I got that appointment right then, I got that other thing I was going to do. Maybe I don't even have an appointment. Maybe I was just going to take some time to myself. But that thought, as quickly as it comes through, is replaced by another thought that comes through and says, wait a minute, you know what? Yeah, this is not a high committal thing right here. So I can shift it. I can move it to accommodate this other need. Now, that's not problematic. And in fact, at times that's needed in certain moments. It becomes problematic when that becomes a consistent way of being, where you're constantly shifting, you're constantly accommodating whatever's in the environment rather than just being here. And this is what I find out in a lot of my martial arts practice, is my master will say, he'll realize that I'm coming over there a lot further than I need to, a lot further out, which also makes me susceptible, right, than what I should be, rather than just being here. This is my space. This is my zone. This is what I am responsible for protecting. And I don't need to go out here in order to protect it, right? I can wait until whatever comes in, then I can protect it from here. So you'll see these things. Once you start looking at them, you'll see patterns and things that show up across different contexts of your life. This is the beautiful thing. Going back to capacity and ability. Capacity. Do I have the capacity? Capacity is like resources, right? Do you have the money? Do you have the time? Do you have the energy? That's legitimate, right? And capacity, feel free to expand that out, but capacity is, we're talking resources, and it can be a number of different things, and or the ability. When we're talking about ability, we're talking mostly like about skills. Somebody needs something replaced. Well, hey, you happen to be able to have the skill to do that. Doesn't mean you should just jump right in and offer that, right? Not necessarily. Again, a lot of these things come back to the question of, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you looking at this other situation? Why are you feeling the need to help? Why are you feeling the need to jump in? What is driving that? We all have free will. And the simple fact is, we need to ask, what is mine and what is theirs? I am ultimately responsible only for this here, right? And yes, we can bring up the argument of, well, if you have kids, or if you have elderly, you have somebody you're taking care of. Yes, all of those dynamics play in. But we're not talking about that in this context. Those are context-specific things, right? And we understand that a 2-year-old, you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices for that 2-year-old because the 2-year-old can't do anything for themselves, right? I am speaking more of adult-centric, functional adult relationships here. I'm also talking about, it's not bad to help somebody, but you can't help everybody. And the most important thing, I believe, is, what is your motive? Where is this drive to help the other coming from? And is your helping of them actually enabling or furthering the problem? Or is it time for you to reach down and help somebody, right? I used to give money to like homeless people all the time. All the time. I stopped, pick people up, give them rides, all this kind of stuff. But then when I got on my own healing journey, I stopped doing all of it. I pretty much stopped helping everybody. Because I was like, you know what? I have given so much away. I need to turn all of that I have given, trying to get love and respect and honor and all the things from out there. I'm going to give that to myself. And right now, I don't have the capacity to help anybody else, and I don't want to help anybody else. And that doesn't make me a bad person. And I had to be in that space for quite some time. I'm not talking weeks or months. I'm talking like a couple of years at least. Right now, I would help on little things here or there, but it was very minimal. My priority was me. My priority was getting some things worked out in my own life. When I look at things now and wanting to help, there's a few questions that come to mind. Is this mine to help with? Right? First of all, if you see another person who's completely dysregulated, maybe they're having an emotional outburst. Maybe it's directed at you, maybe it's not directed at you. And depending on what is occurring in that emotional outburst, it can still be a huge emotional outburst, but it can still be fairly healthy. As long as they are not harming anybody or harming themselves, sometimes that's what needs to happen. They need to have that emotional outburst, right? Other times, they have gone too far and they don't know it because they're caught up in the emotion of it. But unhealthy dynamics are coming out in the environment, be it threats or be it against themselves or against others or whatever it might be. And yes, those are the times then where it is a critical moment to step in and help regulate that situation and help regulate that person. But the biggest questions that I have now when I see homeless people, etc., is this mine? Is it mine to take care of? Right? And most of the time, the answer is no. And granted, this requires some discernment. This requires some practice, as does everything in life. I was on a trip recently, on a road trip with my mom and dad, and there was homeless people all over, and we were stopping in at these convenience stores off the interstates and different things. And for whatever reason, there was this one in particular that just suddenly it was just like, I was pulled toward that person. I went in, did my stuff in the convenience store that I needed to do, come back out, his feeling was still there. Looked at the other homeless people on the other corners, didn't feel that same thing. But for whatever reason, I was drawn to this particular homeless person. And I knew from the practice and the discernments that I'd done, this is mine. And I have the capacity right now to help. And I have the ability to help. And so I went and I helped that individual in that moment. The other question is, do I have the capacity? So maybe it feels like it's yours, but then the next question is, do I have the capacity? Do I have the ability? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe it's yours to help with right now simply by saying a prayer, simply by lifting them up. Thirdly, do I want to help right now? You get a choice. You're not obligated. And it doesn't make you a bad person when you don't help in some situation. Right? Think about discipline. Think about endurance. Think about some of the things. This goes back to robbing people of their experience, right? Robbing people from the experiences that they need to have that will allow them to grow. And it may be a lot of suffering and a lot of pain through that process, but that is what will get them to the next level. And we cannot jump in and help them until they are ready. And one last thing I want to point out, I know this is kind of long. One of the things I was taught, and I heard this a lot in the spiritual community, is that you went through the experiences that you went through so you could turn around and you could help others in those experiences. And you could become a teacher, you become a leader, you could become a coach, you become whatever. But that's why you went through the experiences that you went through. And I hung on to that for a long time. And yet at the same time, I found this resistance to that because my experiences has been with people pleasing. My experiences had been with very unhealthy dynamics, toxic relationships, i.e. narcissistic style relationships, right? And yes, I had all of the experience. I had done tons and tons of reading and research and all this and had it. But guess what? I didn't want to be a coach that's like becomes known as the narc guy, a coach for narcissistic abuse or something, because then that becomes my identity. It's just another trap. And so I resisted that. There was this push pull. Yes, I want to help. I want to help. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that guy. And some people would say, well, you really need to because you've had the experiences. Who best could speak to these experiences, right? But it's the same thing as, well, guess what? I had cancer as well, right? I had stage 3 rectal cancer. And I went through all of that. Does that mean I have to teach and speak and everything on cancer the rest of my life? I don't want to identify with that. Will I share it when it's appropriate? Will I bring these things up when it's appropriate? When I feel it's beneficial to somebody who is either asking for help, or I can just put it out there in a video like this, and when somebody is seeking, they can watch and they can hopefully pull something that is of value to them from what I have expressed. But you were not required to do anything. You are not obligated to do anything. You have to be here. You have to be aligned within here. Because if you are operating consistently from a place of abandonment of self, from a place of people pleasing, from a place where you are always over there and orienting your mind and your energy and your attention over there to another person or to all other people or to the environments around you, to the exclusion or abandonment or sacrifice of yourself, which you will be able to tell by the fact that if you're honest with yourself, there's likely some resentment there. And if there's not some resentment there, there's likely some numbness going on. Because of the fact that I was giving so much in these other capacities, I would spend time alone. But not only would I spend time alone, I would spend a lot of time doing stuff that was escapism. Whether that was going to movies, whether that was just listening to music. I didn't do anything like, drugs or alcohol or anything like that. But those were my ways of escaping through other mechanisms and through other means. Take a look at your life and see what it is. I think this is a profound statement. Just because you have the capacity or the ability doesn't mean it's your responsibility or your obligation. And if you hear that and your body goes, ooh, I don't like that, that is a clue that there's something within you that's saying, yes, it is. It is your responsibility and it is your obligation. And the fact is, in my upbringing, they'll bring up so much stuff about Jesus. Look at all the sacrifices Jesus made and everything. And they skip over all of the parts where pretty much Jesus was off doing his own thing. He had his inner group of disciples or whatever. He talked to them. He taught them special things, right? But he was off alone a lot. And what you will see a lot is when the crowds heard that he was in the area, the crowds sought him out. He wasn't going out there going, I got to give this to you, and I got to give this to you, and I got to save you, and I got to help you, and I got to fix you. He was doing his thing. He was focused. He was in here, and the crowds would seek him out. People would come and seek him out. And in those moments, he would choose, do I have the capacity? And how much capacity do I have? I hope this has given you something to think about, something to chew on for the day. And as always, blessings and love to each of you.